Okay, once we know that our background is fully dry, that means we are allowed to move on to the circle itself to turn it into a sphere through the use of complementary colors. Now, since I selected my ground as orange, that means I have to do the complement of orange across on the color wheel, which is going to be blue. So my sphere is going to be majority blue, but I'm still going to use orange in the sphere to create that neutral. I just need to make sure it's all majority of whatever that color is. So that the sphere is. So here on my red sphere, all of this dark area that you see here, as well as the shadow, was made through the use of mixing green and red together. We've already done this once. So if you are doing a red sphere, you're going to focus on only these sections of red. You don't want it to ever be majority green. All these are majority green over here. All these are majority red. Since your ground is green, then your sphere is going to be red. So you really want to focus on like these 4 boxes and showcasing all that, as well as the idea of transparency to obtain the highlight to make it a 3-dimensional form. 3-dimensional forms always need highlights and always need shadows. Okay, so you can kind of see here on these objects here, they all have a highlight, which is the white of the paper, as well as a shadow, which is the complementary color. So red with green, green with red, purple with yellow, blue with orange. So that was done all together with no black. No black is in this painting right here. It's all done through the use of complementary colors. Okay, so if I were doing orange and blue, which I am, this side would be like the orange side and this side would be the blue side. My sphere is going to be blue, so if this were the blue color, I would focus only on this half of the value scale here for complementary colors on the actual sphere. Then when you do the shadow, it's going to kind of flip. You're going to use majority orange with blue to create that darker value, which I'll get to after I finish the sphere. And then I'll need to make sure my sphere is dry before I move on to my shadow, because we don't want it to bleed into the ground. We're going to want to make sure we're using our big brush still, because it's a pretty big circle, and we can go ahead and just kind of throw down some water. Okay, we want to still stay inside even though no paint is on my brush. A nice even layer coat of water, still staying within the constraints of the line. Okay, going nice and slow around that edge, rotating the paper for whatever is comfortable for me to still stay within that. If your water goes outside the edge of the circle and your paint bleeds out, then it'll go outside the circle. We don't want that. So we're going to start with blue. So I'm going to come in with a layer of blue. You need to absolutely positively make sure you're taking into consideration the idea of transparent to opaque, because if you lose that white on your sphere, it's gone forever. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up. So I'm going to lay down just a base coat here. So not only is this sphere working with the idea of complementary colors mixing together to create a neutral dark, but it's also working with the idea of transparent to opaque to obtain the highlight, because we don't have white paint. So I'm saying that my highlight, my source of light, is coming from the same direction as this guy, which would then be my highlight. On the curriculum website, you can see how light interacts with a sphere, understanding how the backside, the highlight's here, but then it's going to have some darkness on the backside to show that it's curling away from the light source. There's some light that bounces off the ground and comes up to add a little bit of a highlight on the back side of the sphere, and then you're going to progressively work from white to transparent color you have to more opaque, and then you're also going to start to then enforce the idea of complementary colors. So I don't like the way my flat edge brush is working around the edge, so I'm going to come in with one of my tipped brushes. Okay. And I'm going to rotate the paper, whatever makes me feel comfortable the most. Come in with some more blue. Make sure your hand does not smear the other paint or water that's already on there. And notice how I'm rotating my paper all the way around, always pulling towards me, because I think pulling towards me or yourself, you have the most control. Okay, grab some more paint, a little bit more water. You might not need the water, but I did. I'm using my best judgment for my painting and the work I'm working on right now. Okay, and we want it to all nice and flow transitionally into the different values through transparency and opaqueness. And right now we're not worried about the idea of complementary colors just yet, but we will get there. Figuring out where my white is going to be located. Making sure all these values blend together. Okay, I should see no hard edges. A sphere is a perfectly smooth object, and there are no harsh edges or lines on the sphere, so we want to make sure everything's nicely blending together. Okay, I found my white highlighted source, and I'm not going to touch it. Okay, that's going to be just pure white, but the white is going to have a transparent blue next to it, or whatever color you pick. It slowly blends into the white. Once again, no hard edges. I find a lot of students creating a really hard white highlighted area, and we want to avoid that by smoothly blending in our transparent values into the white. Okay, so that's a good start. We got a nice base. Once again, this is very transparent. We want to make sure it's bright and bold and opaque just like those. So now I'm going to come in with another layer of blue, focusing on the back side. Okay, this is where the shadow is located, or the darkness. Once again, light bounces and reflects off the ground, so I'm going to leave a little bit of highlight up against that backside edge to showcase how things look in real life. We want these to look as realistic as possible. Once again, I'm rotating the paper for whatever makes the most sense and most comfortable for me. And I'm slowly going to blend in the idea of that blue into the blue I already have, but don't overdo it. You want that opaque to transparent really blend together. Okay, I don't need any more paint right now. I'm just going to grab some water to flow the paint that is already on the paper, kind of like that dry brush method I was talking about on the ground. Blend this guy out. I don't want to do too harsh of an edge, because spheres have no edge and I want it to blend into that white. Okay, now we can go ahead and start another more opaque value of blue towards the back side and blend it once again into what I already got. If you want to start to introduce on this layer the idea of the neutral color, I've already mixed blue and orange together in this middle tray here to create a gray or a neutral. Once again, blue and orange will create that neutral gray. And then that's going to help reinforce the idea of darkness or shadows on my sphere towards the backside, away from the light source. Okay, you don't want to overdo it with that neutral, because you still want the integrity of the blue sphere to be blue, and you want the integrity of blending the blue into the paper to go transparent for the white to show the highlight from the light source. Okay, came back with my other brush that had blue on it, so right now I'm using two brushes. You have a vast majority of brushes. Don't feel like you can only use one at a time. Clean this brush off a little bit. I think I've got too much paint going on, so now I'm just going to work with the paint that's only on the paper. Blend that out. Take some more paint off my brush. Smoothly blend that value into what I already have, keeping the integrity of my transparent watercolor and my highlighted source. If you overdo an area of watercolor that needs to be transparent, it's going to be hard to get rid of that dark opacity idea. It's easy to go from transparent to opaque, but very hard to go from opaque to transparent, if impossible, once you have too much built up on your paper, because the watercolor soaks into the paper. It doesn't just sit on top, it physically absorbs itself into the paper. And a little bit more blue right there. Okay, now you're starting to see I'm developing that opacity. take a step back and kind of look at your piece from far away. I think I've got too hard of an edge right there. I need to blend that out right there a little bit more, so when we ever take a step back from our art and view it from a different standpoint, it helps us investigate it in another way. Sometimes we get so caught up looking at our art that we lose the idea of what's the big picture of what's really going on. I think I need to blend this out. Come in with a brush with no paint on it. Smooth out what I already just put on the paper. Now some of your spheres might be getting a little too wet, and if we keep overworking our sphere, then we are going to tear the paper. So right now I think my sphere is just a little on the wet side, so I need to still build up more layers. And look how nice and bold and vibrant those colors are right there on the sphere. Mine is still in the stage of transparency. So I'm going to let my sphere dry for just a little bit. I think it's pretty dry enough around the edge. You need to make the best judgment for yourself about this though, but I think I can work on my shadow right now. So now I'm going to come in. Now I want my shadowed neutral to be majority orange because my ground is orange. When you have a sphere, you need to understand where the highlight's coming from. The right hand side, so that means my shadow will be on the left. When you have the shadow on a sphere, the place it's only touching is right here on the very bottom. So it is going to shoot out just a little bit of a shadow on the other side because it's been elevated off the ground. I'm going to blend this into creating a shadow under my sphere. Make sure the shadow is not too big to be a lot bigger than the actual sphere itself, but also make sure it's not too small because then that wouldn't be physically possible. Okay, so once again, my sphere and my ground plane were nice and dry, so I'm not bleeding into my sphere. And then create kind of that rounded edge on the outside to showcase the idea of roundness of the actual object itself. Okay, now my shadow is all kind of one tone right now. I want to now come in and develop those darker values. So more paint, less water, the opacity idea. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit to develop a new layer on top, but I will eventually develop more darkness closest to the object itself. Now if you think, well, that's still wet, I think I want to lighten this up a little bit. I'm coming in with a brush with just water on it, and I'm going to kind of pick up some of the paint as I think I've got too dark on the outside there, and I'm trying to pull the paint off the paper before it dries and solidifies itself into it. I'm just lightening up the edge of the circle, or the shadow, cleaning my brush with the paint that's on it. And then I can also clean my brush off, come in with some pure orange, with some white, or water, and then develop a little bit more orange on top to re-even that out on the shadow if needed. And then blend it out. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. I'll come back, finish this up. I want my watercolor to get nice and dry, and when we come back we will finish up our sphere.